A Chinese-born Canadian tycoon is expected to go on trial in China today, 5 years after he vanished from Hong Kong during an anti-corruption crackdown. A government statement says Canadian diplomats are monitoring the case of Xiao Jianhua closely. Mr. Xiao, the founder of Tomorrow Group, vanished from a Hong Kong hotel. This was during an upsurge of prosecutions of Chinese business people accused of bribery and other misconduct. Authorities have never confirmed whether Mr. Xiao was detained or disclosed any possible charges. His disappearance came as the ruling Communist Party was stepping up efforts to pressure people wanted in corruption cases to return from abroad to stand trial. This fueled fears that Beijing might be abducting people. Well, joining us now to tell us more about this case and its significance to Canada is Dr. Charles Burton, China expert and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Dr. Burton, welcome back to Forum Daily. Now, Mr. Xiao was allegedly kidnapped by Chinese agents in January 2017. So what do we know so far about his prior disappearance?
Well, it was a shocking event at the time because Mr. Xiao had been living in a suite in the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Hong Kong with a large group of all-female bodyguards. And then Chinese agents came to the hotel with a wheelchair and a large suitcase, and shortly thereafter left with Mr. Xiao in the wheelchair covered with a blanket. Our understanding is that he was then put in a boat and shipped back to China, although the Chinese government deny that. But then once he disappeared from the Four Seasons Hotel, we weren't able to have any information on where he was and what charges were laid. He just vanished.
Sounds like the events in a movie, Dr. Burton. Now, why was he targeted by the Chinese government in the first place?
Well, Mr. Xiao was involved in a lot of financial and insurance businesses, and he really, was seen as a kind of banker for the Chinese communist elite to enrich themselves. So he has close associations with the current leader, Xi Jinping's elder sister, Xi Qiaoqiao, who had, when Mr. Xi came to power, sold a lot of her assets to Mr. Xiao, presumably at a generous profit for her. Someone who, subsequently we found out through reports by Bloomberg and the New York Times had hundreds of millions of dollars in Hong Kong and elsewhere. And more significantly, he was involved with the clique of Mr. Xi's rival, Jiang Zemin, particularly the former fourth-ranked member of the Politburo, Jia Qingling, and a man who might have been the successor to Mr. Jiang, Zheng Qinghong. So, Mr. Xiao knows a lot about the dubious dealings in enormous sums of money of people who are associated with the most senior levels of the communist regime. And therefore, I think, they would like to have him give evidence against Mr. Xi's rivals and not to talk about his dealings with Mr. Xi's own family. And this is the fact that it's coming to a close now is probably related to the upcoming Chinese Communist Party Congress, which should be taking place in the fall.
And we know Mr. Xiao is a Canadian citizen. We mentioned Canadian diplomats are watching this case very closely. So what is the significance of this case to the Canadian government and Canada as a whole?
I think it's enormously concerning to us that the Chinese government have refused to allow the Canadian authorities consular access to Mr. Xiao as a Canadian citizen. Under international law, we should have been informed within 48 hours of his arrest, informed of the charges against him, and allowed access to him in prison to see that he's in good shape and to assist him in obtaining defense, and that Canada should be allowed to attend any judicial procedure against him. The Chinese government has denied all of this, and it really calls into question the status of the 300,000 Canadian citizens in Hong Kong. If they are of Chinese ethnic origin, will the Chinese government refuse to acknowledge that they are, in fact, our countrymen, our co-nationals, Canadians?
All right, Dr. Burton, we've got a quick 30 seconds left here, but what are you keeping your eyes on as this case unfolds?
Well, I'll certainly be interested to see if it gives us any further insight into corruption at the senior levels of the communist regime. But my guess is that we won't have any access to any of the genuine information that Mr. Xiao may have about that regime and the people associated with it at the highest levels.
Lots of unanswered questions. Dr. Burton, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today.
Good to speak with you.